everyone, and welcome to Concordia Live. As many of you know, my name is Ashley Aber, Concordia's programming manager. Thank you for taking the time to join us here today. A special thank you to our global patron member, Link Strategic Partners, for organizing today's discussion. In honor of International Youth Day earlier this month, our panel will dive into the importance of youth empowerment and civic engagement. Today's generation of youth is the leadership of the future. In fact, it seems more youth than ever are getting increasingly more active in local, state, and even federal leadership. Our panel will share their firsthand experiences, setting a new standard for their generation. I'm looking forward to hearing from these inspirational young leaders. Thank you for joining us. A few quick housekeeping items before we get started in case you're new here. All attendees are automatically muted upon entry, but we hope you'll take advantage of the chat feature to introduce yourself, react to comments in the discussion, and engage throughout the conversation. To ask a question, please utilize this same chat function at the bottom of your screen. Our moderator will do his best to answer all questions at the end of the session. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded and available on Concordia's webpage and YouTube channel after the fact. I'm honored to introduce today's moderator, Michael Aiken. Michael is recognized by the Washington Business Journal as a 40 under 40 leader and serves on the Board of Trustees for HOBY, or otherwise known as Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership, a global youth leadership nonprofit. Michael became a member of the George Washington University leadership team at the age of 24 and president of a social impact firm that employs individuals from the ages of 16 to 97. Michael clearly is a great example of how you can get involved in leadership at an early age. Michael, thanks for joining us today, and over to you.
I appreciate it so much, Ashley. Thank you to Concordia for once again giving a platform to such an incredible topic. And I am honored to be here today with a truly incredible panel. And my goal is to get us to this discussion as quickly as possible. So when we were brainstorming what we were going to talk about today around International Youth Day, which was celebrated earlier this month, I really kept coming back to this idea that when we're talking about young people, I think too often we talk about young people as future leaders. So in the future, when they lead, they need to know X, Y, and Z. And that takes away all of the empowerment and agency of the young leaders who are doing amazing things today. And that is so incredibly important. So when I was thinking about who we could invite in to be part of this discussion, I wanted to bring together folks who are young leaders in their own right, are helping other young leaders become young leaders. I wanted to bring in people from the civic sector and the public service sector and the political sector, et cetera. And we have hit a home run, if I may say so myself, with the panel that we've assembled today. I know that for much of my career, I was the youngest person in the rooms that I was in. That is rapidly changing as the gray hair emerges here. Mr. Mayor, I know you know what I'm talking about, right? It starts coming in, it happens. But as we've looked at building a firm at Link Strategic Partners, which is a social impact firm, as Ashley said, our youngest employee is 16, our oldest employee is 94, and we have every generation in between. So I've seen the power of multi-generational and intergenerational work in how young people are a core part of that. So we want to unpack that today with this panel. So we've got three panelists today. We're joined by the Honorable Corey Woods, the mayor of the wonderful Tempe, Arizona. We have Raquel Jones, who's director of leadership programs at the People of the American Way and does a lot of work to get other young people into elected office. And we have Erfan Nabizada, who is the co-founder of the Sustainability Growth Project and a youth leader in his own right. And so I could give you bios on all of these incredible humans, but instead I'm going to go to them and we're going to ask them to tell a little bit about their story, about how they became what I'm calling youth leaders in their own right. Give us a little bit about that. And it's only fair, Erfan, that on this International Youth Day panel, we start with our youngest panelist who's doing incredible things. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to this screen here today. Go ahead, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's my pleasure to be here with Mr. Corey Woods, the mayor of Tempe, Arizona, Mr. Michael Akin, the great entrepreneur and great leader, and Ms. Raquel Jones. It's my honor and big pleasure to be here and to share my thoughts and experiences. Actually, sir, I've been involved with climate change for almost my entire careers. I mean, I would say like 7 or 8 years. So I've been doing this since I was in Afghanistan. I was born in Afghanistan. I'm 16 years old, so I did a lot of volunteer works. I did some environment, some climate, and some civil rights work. So my dream was helping all the humans, not just in Afghanistan, around the world. So that was my big dream, and I still doing this.
Erfan, we could spend an hour just going through the bio. I say this with absolutely no overstating. You are one of the most incredible humans I've met. So you just mentioned you're 16 years old, which I know you just had a birthday. So
yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You became a climate activist and advocate for women and girls education in Afghanistan. And then a year ago, when everything changed there, you found yourself moving to the US very unexpectedly. And so in Afghanistan, climate activist, advocate for women and girls, often at great personal risk to yourself, you find yourself in a completely new land. And it would be very understandable that you get here and say, okay, I need to focus on basic survival and acclimation. And instead, my experience with you has been, you got here and said, the work I did in Afghanistan is more important than ever. I'm going to keep being a climate activist. I'm going to keep advocating for women and girls. And I'm also going to address some of the things I see here. And so you've started nonprofits. You're working on serving our unhoused population here in the United States. You're working on journalism for young girls in Afghanistan that you're teaching remotely from here. And there's so much more. Where does that passion and that drive come from to not wait to be asked, but to lean in and be that leader?
Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate. Actually, sir, when I was in Afghanistan, out of the curiosity, I was doing those works. I was seeing what's going on in our society. I was seeing the hunger. I was seeing the disasters that were brought. Like, it was not just climate change. I've told many people that it was not the problem that we had climate change. We didn't have security. We didn't have security, like food security. People were starving because of hunger and many other problems. We didn't have like human rights. Basically, the violation of human rights was and is, and I hope not that it will be, not just in Afghanistan, but in many other countries too. So I would say it has some personal connections. It has some personal roots that I did this. I was very young. I was like 8 or 9 years old when I started my career as climate activist first. So I was seeing that people were like, people were complaining about like flooding, complaining about like other disasters that were happening in northern parts of Afghanistan, because I used to live in Mazar Sharif, which is a northern city located in Balkh province. So I was trying to find out what's the causes, what's the roots of this problem. Mm-hmm. So yes, and then I started researching on climate change. Yeah. And climate change, I mean, the term of climate change is still an unfamiliar word in many countries, not in Afghanistan, even in the United States. So I'm working with young people to make this word wider, make this word familiar to all people. Yep. And we have to care about this.
Erfan, so incredibly well said. I just can't help but smile. When I started my career at 8 or 9 years old as a climate activist, incredible. You saw a need, you invested in that need, and you continue to invest in that need wherever life takes you. And your personal story is one that I respect, and the work you do is one that I respect. So we'll come back to you. Ms. Jones, talk to us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's always so hard to follow Erfan. Like, I don't know what I was doing at 16, but this was not it. But I will say, so a little bit about me. Right now, as you noted, I am the Director of Leadership Programs at People for the American Way. In this role, I really work to uplift and support young progressive elected officials, electeds under the age of 35 all over the country at all levels of office. I also ran our youth program, our Frontline Leaders Academy, where we essentially utilize our young electeds' expertise to help train the next generation of leaders. I work to build coalition with our faith leaders and elected officials and activists, and then also I'm working to build out support specifically for elected women. But a little more about me and how I got to this space and what inspires me. I always say I'm my mother's child. She was always serving and instilled that power of serving in me. I remember her dragging me to community meetings, knocking on doors when the schools were being rezoned, even though it wasn't even affecting us. So it was her drive to take action that really inspired me. But there are a few moments that really like sparked my activism. And one being from Orlando, Trayvon Martin was killed right outside of Orlando. The Casey Anthony case happened in Orlando. And so those were eye-opening experiences that just showed me that our justice system was backwards. And so for me, I thought that I wanted to go straight into law, and in my perspective of it was, I'm going to go learn the law so that I can take it back to our community, and then we can all thrive a little bit better in our communities. But then when I was in college, Trayvon Martin actually got killed when I was in college. And so I was working towards being a lawyer. I just saw there was one thing after another. That was one light bulb that just showed me all the inequities and injustices that were happening in my backyard. And so kind of shifted my focus, and I started working in the Florida House. And as a progressive, anything about Florida politics, that was tough. It was heart-wrenching, loss after loss. And so I remember just being so frustrated, and I was done with politics. I was like, I want no parts of politics. I'm just going to go back to focusing on being a lawyer. When a friend of mine introduced me to the Young Elected Officials Network, and again, it's just this network of young, bold leaders that saw something in their communities and decided to step up to the plate and make a difference. And so when I was first able to go to my first gathering of young electeds, I was instantly inspired. I was reminded that the fight for justice and equity was a long-term fight, and that if we don't take care of ourselves, if we don't support each other, we're going to get burnt out. And so it was reinvigorating and reminded me that my voice mattered in this fight, and that I wanted to continue to use my voice in my life to, one, support other young people, but then also fight to create a more equitable and inclusive community. So my peers inspired me, my community inspired me, and how resilient young people are. And again, to just see an issue in their community and step up to the plate, like yourself, Erfan, and to make a difference and continue to fight.
I love all of that. Your mom and my mom would get along very well. I am a 100% mama's boy, and that activism and that get out there and do something came directly at an early age here. So I appreciate you starting there. It's a good way, and what a journey. We're going to unpack all of this. But before we do, I want to go to our third panelist, which is the Honorable Corey Woods, Mayor of Tempe, Arizona. Corey, give us a little bit about your journey and how you found yourself in the mayor's chair in such a wonderful city.
Well, first of all, Michael, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And just like you, I keep thinking 16 years old. My gosh, like that was so far ago. I can't believe how far I am from 16 at this point. I mean, I'm 43. I'll be 44 in December, and I just can't believe all that you're all doing. So I mean, quite honestly, I'm just completely impressed and floored. I got involved in the political world probably at a very early age. When I first had the opportunity to run for student council back in 5th grade, it's kind of what I knew that's what I wanted to do. I would watch presidential debates with my parents. I was getting active in student government in my school. And I just always had this perspective of that was how I was going to make change. And so for me, I moved to Arizona back in 2003 to be a graduate student at Arizona State University. And my initial thought was, I would get a master's degree and probably be gone in a couple of years and then go somewhere else and get a doctorate. That was my initial plan. But, I kind of then began to come back to some of my political roots and just thought, look, I really would like to make change, but I really want to make change on a local level where I can actually really directly see the impact of the things that I'm working on. And so that led me to running for the city council back in 2006. I wasn't successful in that first race, but I ran again 2 years later in 2008 and won, and have won every race since, including, being elected mayor back in March of 2020. So I've just begun my 3rd year, which is very, very exciting. But for me, I mean, it really came about because I was inspired by the people around me. It was my parents, my father who worked for the National Urban League and fought for civil rights, my mother who was a teacher in New York City public schools and taught kids in the Bronx many times, not just kids who were It was their first time going to college, but many times first person to ever graduate from high school. And so I would hear all of these stories when I was growing up in my kitchen and in the living room and in the family room. And it really just inspired me to do a lot more. And so for me, I just sort of made a decision very early on in my life that, politics was kind of the way that I really wanted to make and affect that kind of change. And that's kind of where it all started for me. And I've been doing it ever since.
I love that, Mayor Woods, and I love the Urban League reference in there. As a very proud former chairman emeritus of the Greater Washington Urban League here in DC, that's a great league family there, and I love that part of the journey. I want to stick with you for a second because you said a lot of really interesting things in there, but you said, I came for college. I decided the best way for me to serve was through elected office. So you made a decision in that moment. You then lost your first race, which is a really easy off ramp at that point of, I tried it, I'm going to go in a different direction. You stayed on that, won your next race as a city council member, and then continue to win all the way through running for mayor. That almost makes it sound much easier than it was, right? Running for office is hard and it involves a lot of choices and a lot of sacrifices. Can you talk a little bit about some of the unique challenges that young candidates may face, right? Earlier in their careers. Talk a little bit about that and frankly, how you overcame them and kept that motivation to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges many times young candidates can face is lack of name ID, lack of big time donors that can actually, write big checks to a campaign. So those become two of the biggest challenges when you're entering the world of politics at a very young age. And I faced those same challenges. When I first got elected, I was 29 years old. I was the first African-American to ever get elected in the city of Tempe. So that was another hurdle that I had to overcome. But a lot of it just ends up being, through, frankly, it's going to sound a little bit cliche, but through sort of hard work and determination. I just made a decision early on that if I was campaigning on the right issues that really connected and resonated with the voters in this city, and I was willing to work my tail off to get there, I could. And I remember when I lost my first race, I remember having a conversation with my father, who's like the king of very insightful advice, but it's so short and so brief that you almost begin to think that you're getting shortchanged at first, until you kind of have a day or so to think about it and go, that was actually kind of brilliant in its simplicity. But his main point to me after I lost that first race, I was 27. He said, Corey, it's not that people didn't like you, it's just that they didn't know you. I'm confident if you get more involved in the city and in the community, and if you want to do this again, at some point, people are going to realize who my son is and what you have to offer and what you can bring to the city of Tempe. And so that was a lot of what kind of picked me back up and maybe say, if there are nonprofit groups that I can get involved with, if there are city boards and commissions that I can join, I'm going to do that. And I did. I got a lot more involved and a lot more active. And through a lot of those connections and that deeper understanding of the city and how it all kind of wove together, that helped me the next time around because more people knew who I was. And I understood more about how to actually campaign and the importance of door knocking and phone calling and all of those items. But it also helped me to raise the necessary funds that I needed to run a successful campaign, to pay for all the signs and the direct mail and the digital advertising and all of the above. So I think that's a lot of, but to be more specific, that really, I think, is the challenge for a lot of younger candidates. If you haven't been on this earth for 50, 60 years, you may not have interacted with the same number of people. So the first time they're hearing your name is indeed the first time. And it becomes hard to convince people sometimes that this person who I see, it's the first time I'm hearing of them. It's the first time I'm seeing them. Do I really want to entrust them with such a massive responsibility? So that becomes a real challenge to get past that hurdle. But then secondly, look, there is a money aspect to this. And many times the people who run for office, they're independently wealthy, or they're retired, or they have a lot of friends who have deep pockets. And so that can become a really huge hurdle to overcome when you're a younger person, and most people are typically in the same situation as you. They've got that first or second job out of college, which typically isn't paying six figures.
Right. I hear that on so many different levels. And Raquel, I want to turn to you because I know you work in this space a lot, right? We've had our own experience with this at Link. I run this great social impact firm that is great because we have phenomenal people. And we have a gentleman on our team who's running for Congress, and he is a great candidate and he would be an amazing congressman. It's been amazing to watch how if you're running well, you also need to be employed. he'll do an 8 to 10 hour day with us and then go to an 8 to 10 hour day as a candidate for elected office. And it shows you why our system is so, I'm not going to be provocative and say something like rigged, right? Why our system is so tilted towards those who have their own resources, their own independent wealth before they run for office, right? It's not really set up for folks who have to work every day to also go out there and be candidates at a local or national office. Raquel, how does an organization like yours approach that? How do you kind of help young candidates get into the arena and get into that race? Because the drive is there, but often the system they're operating in isn't set up for that. Can you build on that?
Yeah. So I'll give a disclaimer. So in my role as YEO, supporting YEO, we support them in the governance process, but through the Frontline Leaders Academy, we provide essentially those resources to help break into some of those barriers. As Mayor Woods noted, money is a huge barrier, right? Like you need money to run. But then when you're elected and you win, you realize, as you mentioned, that I often have to juggle family or, working a full-time job in order to be in this position that is categorized oftentimes as a part-time position, but we know is a full-time workload, subject to public scrutiny, and gets paid very little. So have to work a full-time job. But People For has been working to provide young people that access into the political system, right? We ran a program for the Frontline Leaders Academy for 3 years in LA County because we recognized that the landscape of LA County politics was not reflective of the actual community. And so when we started doing some research and asking young people, it was like they just didn't have a way in. And so being able to be there, build connections with some of the young electeds that were there, we were able to open doors for young people to actually get their foot in the door. And it wasn't even necessarily as a candidate, but to even just be in the room, to be on the mayor's policies team, right? Whichever department that they chose to be in, but being there to support them to get into these doors so that they can have access to being at the table, being in the room. I often say that we need folks that are closest to the pain to be in the room, because we need to know how we need to be inclusive of the most vulnerable in our communities, right? And so I feel like People For has really worked to provide that space to be inclusive of everyone. We need everyone at the table, but we really need young voices as well.
I want to keep on this kind of intersection between politics and civic engagement. So I'm going to stay on this thread for a second, and then Erfan, I'm going to circle back and talk about how this goes beyond the political sphere too, right? Because you're a really good example of you don't need to hold an elected office to make change, right? There's a lot of different models here. But staying on this elected office theme for a second here, Raquel, I'm interested in your thoughts. There are so many movements, and I'm using that word really intentionally. There are so many movements that get their power and their momentum from young people, right? Young activists who are moving us towards a better society and change. And then there's often this refrain that young people are disengaged politically. They vote and look. So how do you have kind of youth-driven movements and then this perception that young people are disengaged politically?
Yeah, I mean,
that a little bit.
It's a complex relationship, as you mentioned. Like you said, youth are often the core of every major civil rights movement in this country, but they often don't feel heard or seen by our systems at play, right? Our youth are the ones that are in our schools. They're living through the lack of resources. They are feeling and experiencing the systemic injustices within our society, but often, so they're motivated to move the needle, but then when it's time to actually be at the table, they're often overlooked. They're not given that opportunity to be there to help in the creating of policies. And so we really have to do a better job at one, being open to listening to our youth, but also hearing them and giving them that platform to be in the room to help us shape our policies to create more equitable societies.
I love all of that. And Mr. Mayor, I'm going to come back to you to build on this. So often campaigns, right, or the politics of this moment can be very partisan, because they are very partisan. But then you're mayor and you got to govern through coalitions and through getting people to come together and make progress. And I will say unabashedly, I've been following your record in Tempe, and you've made incredible progress in 2 years. So what have you learned about kind of the difference between kind of the politicization that we all live in and the need to build coalitions and bring people together when you're in these positions of authority? Anything around that you can shed some light on?
Well, I would say first and foremost, I mean, the job of a person in my role is not to care about party affiliation or labels or anything of that nature. It's to deliver services to people, whether it's, clean, safe drinking water, safe public parks and streets that are properly maintained, and that, I mean, just things that are just sort of frankly nonpartisan in nature. It's like the old saying goes about this: no Republican or Democratic way to pick up the trash, you know. And so that I get a chance to really kind of operate in a very nonpartisan environment. But I'll say this: I mean, you know, our council right now, there's 7 of us. We're all registered Democrats. But we have very, very different opinions on things. Just because you might see the label next to our names, it doesn't mean that we all kind of come down on the issues in the same way. And so you frankly have to learn how, especially in my role, sometimes to listen more than I actually talk. I have to really talk to my colleagues and say, what is it that you're looking to do? Or how can I help you get to this place? And then sometimes it's my responsibility to try to provide whatever middle ground I think I can bridge to maybe get all of us on the same page, or at least enough of us to get to an affirmative vote. So, I mean, I find a lot of the partisanship to be very disturbing at times, because while these people fight and go on cable news networks and become cult heroes and raise tons of money from people all over the country, many times they're not actually getting anything accomplished or, you know, done legislatively. And I'm thinking to myself, it's, you know, taxpayers' money, whatever that pays for your salary, it would actually behoove you to care less about going on a 24-hour cable news network and try to find a way to actually get something passed that actually benefits the people who live in your community or live in your district. And I think that's one of the great things about, you know, kind of my role in the political world in kind of a nonpartisan municipal government space, is that we really are judged less so on the partisanship of these statements that we make, but much more so on what we're actually getting done.
I love that. And this theme here, I think we could talk about for hours and should talk about in larger and larger platforms, because there's so much about what do we need to be coalescing around to make progress, and how do we bring more voices into that process. I'm going to pivot to Erfan now. I want to come back in just a little bit, and I'll give you a second to think about this. We're talking a lot about young people and politics in that part of our discussion. And the need for fresh perspectives, the need for representation, the need to have voices at the table who are impacted by policies. What's the response to, yeah, but don't we also need people with lots of experience? Is there a place for lived experience? Mine is, sure, we need lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. And right now there's a segment of those backgrounds that are completely not at the table in the numbers they should be. But I want to come back to that in a second and think about how you look at that, both as an elected official and Raquel as someone who's getting more people into that space. But I want to pivot here to Erfan, which is where we started. Erfan, there are about 100 different places we could take this discussion right now, but I want to carry on that idea of coalition building and bringing people in, right? So you have said very eloquently that you got involved in these issues because you saw what was happening, right? You saw what was happening, and then you decided, I want to do something about that. And I want to do it myself, and then I want to bring some people along with me. In your role as a youth leader, in your role as a leader, let's take off the youth qualifier. In your role as a leader, is there anything you've learned about kind of bringing people along with you, about building coalitions and bringing people in so that you can have that bigger and bigger impact that you're having? Any thoughts on that you can share with us?
Sure. Yes, I did a lot. I mean, when we founded, actually, before we were founding this sustainability growth project, I was trying to found an organization on my own, but I have 2 other friends. They're seniors at high school. They're very good friends, and they're watching me right now. So I just keep receiving notification from them that, oh, you're so handsome. You look very good.
You have good
really
friends, Erfan. That's great.
Well, yes, sir. Actually, I really want to indicate on some points. Let me step back a little bit. I wanted to talk about what Mr. Mayor said. People who have more deeper pockets, they own more things. They have more money, means they have more power. So there is a theory called meritocracy or meritocracy. I want to combine meritocracy with democracy. We have democracy in the United States. Yes, but we need people in charge based on their efforts, based on their talents, and based on their achievements, right? So sometimes I see that many teenagers, many of the young people and young leaders who for trying to do something, they cannot, they can't succeed.
Mhm.
When I ask them, they're saying that, oh, one of the biggest problems that we have is we lack of opportunities.
Mhm.
And I think that lack of opportunities leads to hopeless,
Mhm.
disappointment. And being hopeless will lead to many other problems.
Mhm.
We will have chaos in our society, within our community, whether it's big or it's small. Yes, some of my friends, okay, let's talk about American politics. Two parties, Democratic Party and Republican Party. They're getting disinformation. Sometimes they're getting misinformations. So we need to stop that. And I think the social media, not just social media, our communication, talking to people, it's not an easy job, like going to door, talking to people. Um, when you're doing campaign, Mr. Woods, he knows better than me that oftentimes your voice is not being heard. So you have to figure out how to talk to people and how the people should listen to you. I think that that's the biggest challenges. Those are the biggest challenges that I've seen so far.
There's so much to unpack and all that, and every time you speak, I sit up and I pay attention because there's so much buried in there. So I asked you a question about how, like, as leaders, you get people to follow you, and then you took us on a journey through political science and philosophy and civic engagement and communications channels, which is incredible. And I think there's a lot in there where, you know, lack of opportunity can lead to helplessness, which is a destructive force in whatever country you're in, right? And then that idea of social media channels, where the promise of social media was about bringing people together in new ways. And often the reality of social media is a platform to divide and send people back into the camps of what they believe in more and more extreme ways. So thinking about all of those becomes really, really important. I'm also aware of something, and you know, I'm guessing you didn't do this in the way that I saw it. You did it because you're a pretty incredible human being. But I got introduced to you through a program called LearnServe International, which is a really great high school-based program for social entrepreneurship. This is a really great program. It's here in the DC area, where they take high school sophomores and they ask you, what pisses you off? And then you answer that question, and then you spend your year putting together a social impact project to solve it. And it's cool. And we're so honored to be a judge every year. Our company brings people into our boardroom, and and that's where I met Erfan, where he was coming up with a social enterprise as a sophomore. And so I look at programs like that, right, that are taking people who have really good ideas and then platforming them, for lack of a better word, to share those ideas with other people. That interaction led you and I to establish a really good relationship as you were preparing to be on a panel about climate change with a former vice president of the United States and elected leaders from around the world. And then we followed up with you being on a panel at Georgetown University, where you were speaking with a panel of international climate change activists, all youth from around the world. I give that background to say, I also think sometimes young people don't fully understand the power that they do have, right? And what I'm calling the ego economy,
Yes.
where if as a young activist, you reach out to a mayor, like Corey Woods would give anyone an audience. But if you reach out to someone who's in a position of power, and then you say, listen, I'd like to learn from you, you suddenly have access to everything you need there. Have you found that, like, when you're reaching out to elected officials, when you're reaching out to people in positions of authority, are they more likely to listen to you when they know you're a young person, or is that still a barrier?
Well, sometimes, sir, we need, first of all, I would have to say that we need equality. I have never faced, ever since I came to the United States, I've never faced racism, but I still hear that a lot of problems are going on. As we heard that Mr. Mayor, he was saying that when he was 27 or 29 years old, he ran for office, but he lost, right? He lost, not because of his race, but because of his money, right? But I want to say something, that it might be a slight possibility that Mr. Wood maybe he has lost because of his race, or because of his religion, or because of his language. I mean, there is like, we have a large community of immigrants in Montgomery County, the county that I live, state of Maryland. But what I found, most of the teenagers, I would say 80% or 85% of the teenagers, because I'm a teenager, I'm talking about a teenager, so I'm making clarification here. They lack of confidence. They don't have confidence. Although, I mean, I'm new, it's just been a year. I mean, I've been through a lot of things, but still, I want myself to keep alive. I want myself to keep myself alive and do whatever I want to do. Yes, sometimes when I reach out to some elected officials, they don't respond. We did a project with SGP. We did a project on Ireland Trail at Rock Creek Park. So we reach out at least to 10 people. Out of 10 people, none of them responded to us. So we had to reach out to the people who are in charge of Rock Creek Park, because we thought that that would be easier. And then they responded right away, and they said that, oh, we are happy to help you. There might be like, there is a saying in our language, in Farsi or in Persian, that if one door is closed, 40 doors will be open for you.
I think you're hitting on this point of, yes, it's both young people having the motivation and the avenues to pursue those opportunities, and it's on the folks on the other end of that experience to open up those doors or to provide some of the platforms for that. It takes both. And Raquel, I want to come back to you building on that, because you work so much in that space of young elected officials. We've talked a little bit about partisanship. We've talked a little bit about the politicization of kind of just general discourse. Is that a barrier overall to young people getting involved, or does that have an impact here? Do you think more people at a younger age in politics would help with that? Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I feel like unpopular opinion. I truly believe that, yes, the like hyperpartisanship and polarization is definitely going to inevitably push some young people away, right? Like there are just going to be those that just don't want to deal with the drama, that don't trust the government for sure, but I'm an optimist. And so I truly also believe, like going back to Mayor Wood's point of that, at the local level, most of these positions are not partisan anyways, right? And so I think that we'll start seeing more young people start running for local positions, but running on more inclusive, bold platforms that are going to just push out the hyperpartisanship. And then unpopular opinion, I think at the state and federal level, I think that we'll start seeing young people running on third-party issues. Like I truly believe that young people are not going to be as connected to the old base, right? And so I think, again, unpopular opinion, that we'll start seeing young people really taking these bold stances and running third party.
Unpopular opinions deserve space and discussions too. So I certainly understand that. And it's about, connecting this at some level back to everything we talked about. Like Erfan got involved at 9 years old because he saw an issue and wanted to work on a solution. So I think if people are finding issues that they want to work on and they're not finding a natural home for those in whatever established parties or organizations or platforms are, it is natural that you would seek to either create or find those new places and spaces. Mr. Woods, I want to come back to you both as a former city council member at a young age and also as a mayor. How have you worked with some intentionality to bring new voices into your governing style? Do you have platforms where you're getting advice from young people? Do you have platforms where you're getting advice from not young people, right? How have you brought that voice into your governing style?
I think a lot of it is a couple of things. One, it's about the issues that you're focusing on. Our city has a very big interest in sustainability and climate justice. I actually just got out of a meeting with a couple of folks who work in our sustainability department about an hour ago or so. I mean, that's an issue that a lot of our young people deeply care about. And it's something where we've put a lot of money and resources into. As a matter of fact, just this last budget cycle, we gave that department a 56% funding increase so they could hire 4 additional people to do even more work in that area to combat climate change and to frankly be even more visible in a lot of our neighborhoods and with our business community to show them all the things that we're doing. We have a very big focus. My big focus is on affordable housing, is trying to make sure that people who actually are graduating from high school or community college or a four-year college still have the ability to live here within the city of Tempe. Because that was a problem I would hear from people all the time, is that I grew up in Tempe. I went to all the schools here. I would love to stay here, but I simply can't afford it on my first time salary immediately upon graduating from high school or graduating from college. So if you're talking about issues that are relevant to young people, they'll respond in kind and want to take part in the system. But I think also from my perspective as well, it's, I have the power to appoint people to city boards and commissions. And what I've tried to do is bring in new people and young voices and to make sure that we're really providing diversity to a lot of these boards. When I first joined the board, and I'm just saying this not to be provocative, but the Development Review Commission is probably the most high-profile commission in the city of Tempe, because we have a lot of zoning issues and a lot of development that's taking place, especially in the downtown urban section of the city. When I first joined the council, every member of that commission was a white male. And I really sought to, frankly, diversify that group with voices, young, old, white, brown, black, LGBTQ. I mean, my whole thought is, the diversity of this culture and of our city, frankly, enriches us and will help us to have even better conversations about what development should look like moving forward, to make sure that it's truly serving all of its residents.
Yep.
And also I should make a point of saying that, the whole notion of, it wasn't that the people who were on the commission before were not qualified. They were actually exceptionally qualified. Yep. But the people that I've appointed are also exceptionally qualified. So when people make comments about, or the insinuation becomes, well, I would get diversity, but I don't know where to find people. And they kind of make an insinuation that the quality is somehow going to go down if we now have to begin to include more of a diversity of voices. It's an absolute joke. The fact of the matter is, these people are there. They are highly qualified. And in diversifying that group of people, that commission, we've actually enhanced it. We haven't diminished it in any way, shape, or form. So I think it's up to people like me too, like once, we get to positions like this, to make sure that we are appointing young people and people from more diverse voices to really kind of enhance what those boards and commissions look like.
What I love about that is you've taken a really additive approach, right? It's not either or. We can do this better by bringing in more voices and bringing in more representation, which is a really, really smart way to look at that. I know, unfortunately, we're running out of time very rapidly, and this could go for another hour. But one of the things that I've been reflecting on during this conversation is, we've talked very much today about empowerment, right? And we've talked very much about it in the civic space. We've talked about it in the political space, in the government space. It's not the topic of today, but I reflect on this a lot as a business owner, right? And as someone who runs a national firm with offices in 5 US cities and 1 in the UK, this idea of empowerment and young empowerment, youth empowerment, young leader empowerment is not unique to politics. It's not unique to civic life. It is also something we have to look at in business. It's something we have to look at in education. I read a study years ago, and it asked people, it was one of those typical, what do millennials want surveys, which I think are usually not right because you're framing the questions wrong. A millennial is a whole group of people. It's not one thing, right? But it was one of these, what do millennials want? And they were asking them on their first day of work in a Fortune 500 company. And 12% said they wanted to stay there and become senior leadership. And 65% on day one of their new job in a Fortune 500 company said, my goal is to leave and start my own business. Now, 65% of people weren't going to leave and start their own business because it's really hard and expensive. And the system is set up not to make it easy for people to go and start their own thing. But what I was hearing in that result then was, people want to be entrepreneurial. They want a place to create. And if businesses can create that, they'll stay. And if they can't, they'll leave. And so we got to think about, how do we reorient all of our structures and systems to allow for entrepreneurship, which, again, I'm not trying to use the buzzword, but entrepreneurship, and that I want to create some of that destiny. I want to create some of those paths forward. I see what's not working, and I want to be part of that change. Give me a platform for that, or I'm going to create one. Push against that, and you're missing out on all this opportunity. And I'm hearing this thread throughout our discussion today. We have 2 minutes left. And so what I want to do, and I'm going to ask you all to go with me on this journey. We have covered a lot, and we've talked about some heavy stuff, but it's also, in my opinion, been a really forward-looking, optimistic discussion. And I want to end on that note. I'd like to ask each of you to share something that keeps you optimistic, So relate it to youth empowerment, relate it to the topic, relate it to whatever you want. But after a discussion like this and the work you do every day, what gives you hope? What can we all take away as the listeners today on the forward movement coming out of this? Does that make sense? Anyone want to go first? Go for it, Raquel.
Jump in. I'll say, I truly cliche, but young people, they give me hope. They inspire me. Their fresh perspectives of looking at issues and their willingness to jump in and deliver bold solutions keeps me optimistic. It keeps me hopeful, the way that when they see something wrong in their communities, again, that they will, step up to the plate and lead. It keeps me hopeful and excited for the future.
I love that. Mr. Mayor, what keeps you hopeful?
What keeps me hopeful, I guess, is seeing the impact of the work that so many people are doing across this country that are really moving us in a very positive direction. But really, it's a lot of the people who are far younger than me who are doing really great work in this civic space. I mean, I think to myself all the time, I know that eventually I will be able to retire from work and from politics because there are so many incredible young people in the pipeline who are going to continue to carry the torch forward. And so that's honestly what gives me hope each and every day that I wake up.
I love that. Erfan, we started with you, my friend, and we're going to end with you. What gives you hope, Erfan?
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, one thing that I really, really appreciate is what the young people, excluding me, not me, but people not in this country, around the world, still, they're facing a lot of challenges and a lot of problems, a lot of barriers, and a lot of burdens are on their shoulders, but they're really, really trying really hard. They want change and they're making change. And it keeps me really hopeful. And also, I did the project with Afghan girls, and now Afghan girls are deprived of their rights to education, their fundamental rights. But they have the hope to one day they go to school. I was talking to one of them. She was saying to me that my grandmother, not my grandmother, her grandmother couldn't go to school. Her mother couldn't go to school. And she was saying that this is her time, that she cannot go to school. But with finding more ways, with exploring new ways,
yep,
she is able to do something. She's able to educate herself. And I really want to point out one thing, that when people are uneducated, that would cause a chaos in a country. Like it leads to governments get corrupted, ignorant people who are not educated, they come to power and they rule the entire country and an entire nation. Yeah.
There's, again, another hour in just that last part, but the fact that you're still doing so much to invest in your home country is really, really important, and we're all better for it. I am hopeful for discussions like this, and I am hopeful and thankful to Ashley, who I'm going to toss to, for Concordia giving a platform to a discussion like this, and for the power of convening that is core to what you do all over the world. So with gratitude, I toss this back to you.
Thank you, Michael. On behalf of Concordia, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you again to Link Strategic Partners and today's esteemed panel, proving experience and leadership do not go hand in hand with age. I hope this discussion made each of you feel a bit better about the safe hands our future's leadership is in. I know it did for me. If your question was not answered today, or if you are interested in learning more about the Concordia membership community, I encourage you to reach out to membership@concordia.net. A follow-up email will be distributed next Thursday with the recording of today's event and the opportunity to connect with today's panel, as well as Link Strategic Partners, to continue this discussion. We don't want it to stop here. Thank you all so much again, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.